Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to talk about Re-Animator, or Herbert West's Re-Animator, or H.P. Lovecraft's Re-Animator. I'm not sure. It has Herbert West versus Lovecraft and all that stuff. Herbert West is a character. I don't know. It's a little confusing, but I really love horror movie stuff, and sometimes I just kind of go down this rabbit hole of just watching old horror movies and stuff. So I hadn't seen Cronenberg's Re-Animator, so I just randomly kind of listened to the audiobook or of the audio short story of it, and then watch the movie of it. And I kind of want to talk about it because I think the movie is an interesting and fascinating adaptation of a short story, because the adaptation is like very accurate while being so completely different. It's it's accurate and it's not very different, but it's like different. I'll explain. So yeah, let me know in the comments down below if you have read Re-Animator or seen the movie, and we can talk about it down in the comments. So as always, make sure you hit the like button and subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. And let's begin. So, Re-Animator. Of course, it originates from H.P. Lovecraft, someone who I knew a lot about. Well, I didn't know much about. I knew the mythos. I knew the Lovecraftian horror, and I knew that concept for a long, long time because I've always been into horror more or less, and like that's kind of been one of those things, eldritch monsters and all this kind of stuff. It wasn't until I got older and started really researching the people who were responsible for some of the stuff I really like that I then found out H.P. Lovecraft was a huge racist. And I was like, well, of course he was, because it was like the 1800s or whatever, and most everyone was incredibly racist. And he, on top of just being racist for the time, he was extra racist, mostly because of a lot of like issues he had, like agoraphobia and just fear and terror, literal fear of other people and other kinds of people. Basically, anybody that wasn't like a white Protestant, he did not like and was terrified of. So like that's whatever. But it becomes very obvious, and the more you actually read of the stuff, it becomes very obvious. And in Re-Animator, I think it was done. It's one of those things that is very. It's not surprising if you know about like history at that time period, because there was a time in like the turn of the century, almost the 19th century or so, when it was very believed with very bad science that different ethnicities were effectively completely different species. Like there was the World History Museum, I believe it was, where like basically they tried to assert black people are not human in certain ways and stuff, like a bunch of bullshit, a bunch of nonsense. So all of that kind of lives in this story a little bit, but it's kind of done subtly. So Re-Animator is basically about one of the classic original mad scientist characters. This guy is totally a mad scientist. He's obsessed with trying to resurrect the dead or just bring them back to life. He doesn't really, it's he kind of calls it like giving them new life, but it's resurrection. He has this like formula that he injects into the people, and like depending on how fresh the body is, it'll come back with varying states of memory. Basically, it'll either only awaken the instincts and like the physical motion or whatever, versus any intellect or any actual higher brain function or anything. So essentially, throughout the short story, that is this mad scientist trying to get fresher and fresher bodies and stuff, and trying to continue his experiments and trying to basically become the master of death in various ways and stuff. And the movie is pretty much exactly that, except in the short story, it is told almost like an editorial. It is told based on someone's research of what was going on, or someone talking about what was going on. So it's from a third perspective, like third person. Is that proper? Or fourth, I don't know. It's so basically as a narrative, we're almost like reading the scientific reports and like looking at the evidence of the aftermath and stuff, very much like a lot of Lovecraft stuff, where it's often the person that was the victim or like have been driven crazy or something like that, or somebody that was the final survivor, some sort of witness to the events and stuff that we will learn about these happenings through. So the difference obviously is in the movie, we're in the perspective of the characters as this stuff is happening. So therefore, it changes a little bit about the nature of it. The way the short story is, you're a little hands off. You got a little distance from it. But in the movie, you're right there in it. You're basically with the characters themselves, and it creates a completely different environment for me, at least. The story was very fascinating. It felt very much like the chronicles of a mad scientist. It felt very Frankenstein. felt like something of that, like a modern new interpretation. Actually, it's very much just straight up Frankenstein when you think about it. It's like a very cool kind of modern interpretation of it, and it's kind of interesting, like the way the science progresses from has been dead for a while versus freshly dead versus when he starts to just try to reanimate just body parts and stuff to see what happens there. So it's just fascinating from a crazy evil scientist kind of mad scientist perspective. But one of the things that just stood out to me is just like, come on, man, seriously. The reason why I brought up the World's Fair thing earlier and stuff about racism or whatever is that in the story, like he notices the formula has to be one way if you're trying to resurrect animals. Then it needs to be another way if you're trying to resurrect humans. But then he tries to use the same formula he uses on everyone else on this black guy, and it doesn't work. And he basically alludes to, oh, it has to be a completely different formula. It doesn't work the same way because black people aren't the same, blah, blah, blah. Bullshit, racism, stupid stuff. Like, it just, I was like, I rolled my eyes so hard on it that it almost took me out of it. So, love, of course, that's not in the movie at all. They kind of just, smooth over most of Lovecraft's racism. And, they just kind of do it straightforward. So the story, though, in the movie, it kind of becomes a bit more of a romance story. So like the mad scientist is still a mad scientist, but then the dean of the college that he works at is like it's weird. There's a weird kind of love triangle situation happening where if I'm not mistaken, because he tries to date the main guy, the main scientist guy tries to date the daughter or marry the daughter of the dean in order to basically secure his position at the university, more or less. And then I think it's the other scientist that has a huge crush on her who ends up getting killed and becomes the head. And then we get the whole, it's crazy. The whole story is it's so much more personable. It's so much more about actual characters, and it's so much funnier because it's just black humor. It's just complete black comedy in the story, and it is far more sexual in a lot of ways. There's a lot of nudity in the story, but it's nudity that makes sense because these are cadavers a lot of the times, so they are obviously naked when they're being not dissected, but autopsied and stuff. So when they're being reanimated, they're naked, and half the time they're doing very zombie stuff. So it's just it's there. But the guy who gets resurrected very well after his head is chopped off, and it just works really well because he's so fresh. He has all his faculties and stuff. He still even wants to continue his plan of stealing the research and taking credit for it. But he has a crush on the dean's daughter and stuff, and it becomes this gross sexual thing after a minute, and it kind of leads into the end of the story, which is similar to the way the short story ends, but it's different. So I'll leave you to kind of enjoy both versions because it's a lot of fun and it's really interesting. I totally recommend it. But I think it's really fascinating how we can get this very simple short story, much like how The Mist worked out really well. I think short stories to be adapted, I think that works brilliantly. I think short stories make the best form of writing to adapt into a movie. You can get the entirety of what's written, but you can add so much more to make it more fleshed out and make it more entertaining and energetic and stuff. So I really, really enjoy it. I think this is a great example of that phenomenon working really nicely. So let me know in the comments below. Have you either read the short story or seen the movie? What do you think of it? Do you think it's just super gross, kind of gross out horror because it's Cronenberg and he is infamous for that? So I really like it, but let me know in the comments down below. We can talk about it down there. So make sure you hit the like button, subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already, and I will talk to you all next time. Peace.